Hello, and welcome to MarsPod, the podcast about how AI is changing society and the big picture impact it can have on your daily life. Today's episode is brought to you by MarsCrowd, your one-stop data labeling and collection company, providing real-life data to boost your machine learning models. I'm your host, Mark Wesley, and today's guest is Dona Sarkar. Dona Sarkar is a software engineer, a multi-published author, a public speaker, and the owner of her own fashion business called Prima Dona. She leads an advocacy team for Microsoft's low-code, no-code power platform. Dona, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark. I'm really excited to be on this. I love the mission of your company and this podcast to just educate people on what AI is and what AI is not. So thank you very much for inviting me to join you today.
Absolutely. I know going back to our previous conversations when we had a chance to talk about what MarsPod's goal is, as well as what you're doing with the Power Platform at Microsoft, it just seemed kind of like a perfect match. So I'm also really excited about this podcast. It's been one that I've been looking forward to for quite some time now. So what if you could just give us a brief introduction about yourself, kind of how you came to be in the position that you're in today, and just let people know kind of what your story is.
Of course. So I'm Dona. I'm from Detroit, Michigan in the U.S. I grew up in Detroit. I went to school at University of Michigan, go Blue, in Ann Arbor. I studied computer science, and I joined the tech industry right after college. So I've been at very large tech companies throughout. I joined Oracle, and then I've been at Microsoft for 16 years almost in June. Is it June?
Wow.
No, it's not June yet. In June. I've always been what's called a high code dev. So what that means is a traditional software engineer. People who learn traditional coding languages like C, C++, that kind of thing, and making things that traditional software engineers would make, such as operating systems, which I've made for many years. I worked on our first holographic platform for Microsoft called HoloLens, which is a device on your head. So imagine like a Windows device that you wear on your head.
Wow.
So I've worked in these high code spaces for a very, very long time. And a few years ago, I was introduced to this concept of low code tools. And I thought that was such an interesting and fascinating idea. I thought, who the heck would use a low code tool? Because if you're interested in coding, wouldn't you just learn coding and just do that, a thing we've been doing for 20 plus years? Or you would just not do any sort of coding. And my eyes were opened because I met so many interesting people in the community who come from very different backgrounds than I do. These are folks who may have worked in nonprofit. They may work as a security guard in an airport. They may be a bricklayer. They may be a teacher. They might be an accountant. They all have whole, complete lives that did not contribute to them being a coder because they were busy people. They had jobs, they had families, they had things going on. So they don't really have time to go off and go get a computer science degree or go to a coding boot camp or anything like that. Instead, they picked up this suite of low-code tools and they used it to solve business and life problems for themselves. And I found that so very cool because they're saying, you know what, we're going to take all these tools and build our own apps for, mobile devices. We're going to build automation. We're going to build chatbots. We're going to build AI tools. And we're all going to do that using these low-code tools with the whole purpose of solving a business problem. So we're not going to get bogged down on building the infrastructure on the platform. We're just going to use the tools built on top of it. So the analogy I'll give you is you're furnishing a house and you need to buy a table. So you've got some options. You can go to the woods, chop down a tree, and cut it into pieces, take it home, set up a woodshed, and build a table. Or you can go to IKEA and get all the parts of a table and come back and assemble the table. Mm-hmm. Or you can go buy a table. So these are the three ways that we go about building things in the real world. And that's how software really is in modern times, where, yes, you can build that thing from scratch, like go chop down the tree, which I have tended to do. Or you can go get the parts and build it together yourself, made of things that someone else has already chopped down. But you can customize it exactly how you want it to be. Or you can just buy a ready-made product at the end. So low code is really between ready-made out of box and build the thing from scratch. So fascinating industry. I find myself in it learning every day all of the things that you can do with low code tools that frankly just blows my mind.
That's kind of a perfect example about the three different levels of what you can do. I know for me personally, I kind of fit into exactly the type of person you were describing, who has a different job, doesn't necessarily have the time to become a master of learning to code, but I want to kind of fix a problem and I want to do it as fast as possible. And I think even today, like when you look at all of the videos and media that are available on YouTube for tutorials, I think it's kind of a perfect sandbox to mess around with something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. What is very cool is most of the people who work in the low code space, like I'm speaking on behalf of Power Platform people, they learned everything they needed to from YouTube because they needed to solve a problem. So they would look up, like, how do you make an inventory management system? And they would just find a YouTube channel showing how to do that using low code tools. They're like, go to this website, use, saying this thing, drag over this template, add in your values here. And I'm thinking, wow, okay, this is awesome. This is the best way to learn how to build, is by watching other people who have built give you the best practices and their, favorite tricks and tips and such and such. So much information out there. So much.
Absolutely. Before we dive deeper into the conversation, there's something that we like to do with all of our guests, which is ask you, what is your AI doomsday scenario? Do you think that robots are going to take over the world anytime soon?
So, because I'm in the tech industry, I have one of two opinions, right? Either robots are going to take over and we need to unplug everything and retire to a farm in Iowa tomorrow. So that's one. And the other one is robots are so dumb. Right now, for example, I cannot even get automation to send a cancellation message if I set an out of office day on my calendar, for example. Right? That won't even happen automatically. We can't even get a cancellation message for email. So I think we're really far from robots taking over our lives and eating our brains. I actually don't think that's going to happen. And the reason is that these are just zeros and ones that are controlled by humans. As long as we humans continue to check each other on being ethical, we're going to be fine. We're going to be absolutely fine. The robots learning to think on their own and execute things without our consent, that's not a common situation that I personally am worried about. Do I worry about the ethics of humans? Yes, I 100% worry about ethics of humans. Because as soon as you apply AI, they're able to take their own ideas and biases and viewpoints and scale them to billions of people without it having to be each person buy my thing. You just look at a basic thing face recognition cameras, right? Just look at face recognition cameras. Once that tech is created, it doesn't just go to people who happen to buy this laptop right here, what you're using. It happens to get bought by everyone who builds traffic violation cameras. It happens to get built by everyone who, puts in cameras in banks or stores or whatever it is. So whatever biases you built into that facial recognition now has spread across to billions of organizations all around the world. So the chance of bias spreading very quickly and somewhat out of control is a human problem. And that is something that I worry about more than robots thinking independently.
Absolutely. I think that from some of the conversations that I've had in the past, that's the part that people are afraid of the most, is the prevalence of bias or the perpetuation of bias in AI, that it gets to a point where it kind of puts things in motion that are difficult to kind of come back from. And it just kind of permeates into society. And I think that that's a really fair fear to have about what's going on with AI. I learned a little bit about just how data sets are commonly just distributed and borrowed among a lot of different businesses or universities in academia, and how just one biased data set can actually find its way across the world.
It's very true. And here's the problematic thing. A set of people may make a data set for some sort of an experiment, and they don't actually mean for that data set to be used in production for millions and billions of use cases. And they definitely don't mean for that data set to be used globally. So many of these data sets, like just the way you tag pictures, or the way will define text or anything like that might be done in the US, and then we apply that to a global audience. That is a problem. And that is the kind of thing that we as a tech industry need to get better at, is when you are creating data sets and when you are identifying like color or whatever it is, you keep in mind the global audience. Like, I'll give you a real example. I was in Lagos, Nigeria many times for work, and there the word to describe someone who's not Black is white. So when the people would go out to the cars where, we all have rented cars for the week, and we would always have specific drivers there to drive us around because the traffic in Lagos is pretty unpredictable. The people who were looking for us would go out and say, "Where are the white people?" Meaning people like me. And if you're seeing me right now, you see I'm not really what we would consider a white person in the US. I'm definitely, olive skin background. So just the definition of what we consider white and Black in the US is so different than what we consider in Lagos, Nigeria, which would be different than in Jakarta, Indonesia, be different than in, Buenos Aires. So the fact that we would happily use a data set that's made in the US in all of these places would automatically start from a place of bias. And we don't think about that as much as we should be. Like, where can this be used and where should it be used? So these are some of the areas that I'm really looking forward to our industry being much more careful about.
What do you think are some potential safety mechanisms that we can put in place in order to kind of mitigate this issue?
So we, as a global audience, over the last year and a half, have learned about this thing called GDPR, where we are not able to share personal information without their people's consent. Like, every website's got that except the cookie thing. And for big companies, this became a really big deal. So most people had no idea what privacy meant before. They're like, I kind of know what security is. What is privacy? And it turns out privacy is everything from someone's name to their IP address, to their home address, to phone number, all of these things that are personally identifiable information called PII. So privacy became a huge deal. It was a global thing that swept across 195 countries. And every company had to figure out, are we making sure to protect our customers' privacy data so it never gets beyond our walls and beyond just the project? Like, for example, at Microsoft, if I'm working on a new project, they will ask me, do you need access to PII data, this personal data from our customers? Because unless you absolutely need it, you don't get access to it. And if you absolutely need it, you have to sign a bunch of waivers talking about how you will not share it. You will not refer to one thing you see in these documents publicly or in conversation, because we don't want to give away any of our customers' info, who they are, where they live, because it's so easy to identify who someone is just based on like two pieces of information, like their first name and their city. So easy to identify. So the care we've taken with a policy like GDPR, and I know a lot of people were really resentful and stressed out, like, oh my God, this policy is coming and we have to do so much work to mitigate and train our staff, etc. But it took a global issue like that for us to really just stop and bring awareness to this. Now privacy training is a part of everyone's job, right? You can be working at a drugstore and you still have to go through making sure not to announce people's names on the whatever overhead thing, talking about which medication. So privacy is now everywhere and it's just part of our lives. So we have to do the same thing for biased data sets, where we have to say, oh no, where did this data set come from? And who made it? And what exactly was the makeup of the people who made this data set, who deemed it official, who deemed it something we should use? What was it used for? What should we use it for? So we just have to, we can't just randomly buy data sets off of Kaggle and claim that this is truth, because those are all they're just open source data sets. Like Dona can make one and publish it, and suddenly, you, Mark, can use it, assuming it's official because it happened to be made at Microsoft. But what does that really mean? So we have to be careful about publishing, and we have to be careful about downloading as an industry all up.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's a really practical way of trying to just take responsibility for what you're doing. I think
Right.
Another thing too is people don't always know the application of that initial data set. And maybe it worked okay for that specific application, but it might not work for the application you're using it for. Or you don't know what the ramifications would be. So I think
Right.
that's sound advice. I'd like to learn a little bit about like what it was like, kind of you going to Microsoft initially, what the landscape was when you first got there versus how it's evolved to where you're at today.
So 2005, when I joined Microsoft, it was a very different company than it is right now. Microsoft back in the day was, they were an operating system and Office suite company. Like they made Windows, they made Office, that's what they made. They made some other stuff that some people had heard of, but most hadn't. And Microsoft is very used to doing that and nothing else, and doing, many, many versions of it. And it was definitely a company where we did not keep in mind all of the things that make employees and customers human. Mm-hmm. Like just some basic differences. We used to have 4 or 5 year product cycles. Like I worked on Windows, many versions of Windows. And the way we used to make Windows was we would the product team, 10,000 people, it was quite a few people, would disappear off the grid for like 2, 3, 4 years, make a version of this operating system or this Office suite and ship it one day and say, okay, it's out there in the world. I mean, we used to have a beta 1 and a beta 2, but mostly it was there to make sure the app installed, right? It wasn't there to be this holistic, inclusive activity. So we would just ship this product and assume that it would work for the billions of people who use this product out there. And then we'd just move right on to the next thing. Like legitimately the next week, we'd finish one version on Friday or on Thursday, have a ship party on Friday, and then start the next version on Monday. That's what we used to do. We did this for years, long before I got there, long after I got there. But over the last, I would say 6 years, and I call it the Satya Nadella era. And a lot of people will say that for a reason, because we became a much more thoughtful company. So we no longer create for, we co-create with. So just the practical difference and what that looks like is Windows 10, which is also a ginormous operating system, was something where we wrote lots and lots of lines of code, and we did not ship it out to our customers after 4 years. We shipped it after a week. We shipped it out to this group of people called the Windows Insiders, who'd signed up to be early access folks. They want to see what's being built, they want to test it out, but more importantly, they want to give feedback and have their voice be heard during this entire process. So this insider program started off with, we thought, oh, maybe we'll get like, I don't know, maybe 100,000 people. That's a lot. Who would want to give access on an operating system, give feedback on an operating system? People are busy. They don't have time for this. Oh my, like 2 million people signed up for this activity. So It turns out people like being involved with the process, right? Like 2 million is quite a few people in many countries. Right now, it's been, 8 years since Windows 10 came out, probably 6 to 8 years, something like that. And we're at like 19 million Windows Insiders, every country in the world. And these are people who are still actively giving feedback on Windows, the operating systems, along with all the apps that run on top of it. So this is something we never would have done 20 years ago. But now every single product at Microsoft is a co-create with, not a create for. And I love that. I love that because you're not building your biases into this product on day one. You are taking into account the usage patterns and expectations of people in 195 countries and making sure that this thing works for them. And thank God we did, because we found so many issues that we're like, well, that doesn't work in left to right languages or in right to left languages. Like, that was dumb. We didn't check that. Or, in languages that are pictorial more than written in, the Latin alphabet. So we really need to check our biases when it comes to these things. And, I can go on about accessibility all day long, just shipping things that are inaccessible to 1 billion people who have assistive tech needs. So such a different company. Many people will call it the Satya effect. I call it that, but also it's growing up. It's growing up as an organization and realizing, yes, we're a tech company, but we're also a company that exists with our mission to empower everyone on the planet to achieve more, to have some sort of societal impact that's good. And we consider that our responsibility.
Absolutely.
Which is awesome.
I think that there's just something so powerful about being able to create with instead of create for. I remember I was on a project, and one of the things that we did was we created a group of people around the globe to ask them to give insight. And I remember in the beginning, like being a little bit hesitant about that, because I thought, man, they might take it as we're like asking for free work or free information and stuff like that. But the amount of, I would say, enthusiasm that people shared, like to feel like they were being a part of building something, like building a new brand, was something that was kind of infectious. So anytime we would give updates or produce surveys, like there was so much just like willingness to kind of give that information and feedback, because we were showing them real ways that what they were saying was actually being utilized for what the end product was looking like. So I've been able to experience firsthand the joy that comes from co-creating, like rather than like creating for.
Totally. I'm glad you did that. And, you know, the whole free work versus not free work thing is a big question. But I have learned that when you go and pay people to do this work, they now think of it as a job, and they tell you what you want to hear rather than giving their free opinion. Because when they're doing it as a volunteer, they're like, hey, I'm doing this as a volunteer. This is my point of view. Once you're paying someone, they're like, yeah, if I don't tell you what you want to hear, I will no longer be getting paid this thing. So we've experimented with both of these things, and we've realized it's not free work. It's people who want to give their feedback without any sort of expectation of we expect certain answers from you, or we don't expect certain answers from you. So that's been a very, very eye-opening exercise.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's kind of go into the thought behind building the Power Platform and just the democratization of AI. Like, what was the initial thought behind the Power Platform, and how has it kind of developed into what it is today?
Okay. So Microsoft, along with most tech companies, have always been of the camp of everyone in the world who wants to should learn to code, because it's given us so much freedom and power and ability to create things co-create with this global audience we have. So we've been of the pro coding camp movement forever, right? Like we have coding sessions in our Microsoft stores when they were open. We have tons of free coding resources online. We partner very closely with code.org to bring computer science into the classroom. We're like very, very learn to code. I've always been like this. I believed in this since I learned to code. I think, oh my God, everyone should learn this. Such a cool thing. But again, we learned that people just don't have time for this. They just don't have time. They don't have time. They don't have interest. They just want to solve the problem. So why would they learn to code? Because they want to solve a problem. Why don't they just solve the problem? So this era of this concept called a citizen dev was born. And citizen dev is exactly how it sounds. They're a citizen who happened to become a developer to solve a specific problem. And citizen devs are in every company you've ever heard of. They are people who work in finance, legal operations, HR, and they are the ones who tinker with the technology and configure it to look exactly right for their specific business unit. So we were realizing, wow, there's a lot of citizen devs doing very interesting things with Excel of all the things. Excel is like the quintessential citizen devs tool, because people who are good at Excel are real good at Excel. They know how to make those formulas and macros that I just can't even wrap my head around. They can make Excel do things. Thinking this Excel is actually an app that you built. You've turned Excel into an app. It is fascinating. You can calculate, like you put in 3 numbers, it calculates like your entire forecast for the next 10 years. It's just fascinating to me, the things people have done with Excel. So we at Microsoft said, let's extend this. Why don't we turn all of this data into Excel into data visualizations easily? Why don't we turn this Excel data into an app that automatically generates into like an app looking interface that looks good on a phone? Why don't we take this Excel data and turn it into something you can automate? So that's how really it started, looking at a bunch of these things that existed that we didn't know were low-code tools, but they are low-code tools, like Excel, like SharePoint. Some people use SharePoint. And that's when Power Platform was really born. We said, all right, let's take these data stores that everyone's using, and put some sort of a UI on it so everyone can just build their UI. And let's see what happens. And it just took off. Power Platform is one of the fastest growing products in Microsoft history. The audience is extremely different than what you expect from a Microsoft audience. They're not, I would say, techies by default. Now they are, but it didn't used to be. Our first generation of citizen devs were really people who worked in completely different industries. The community is amazing. Global community of these Power Platform users. They self-formed, self-identify as power addicts, which is amazing. And they help each other solve the most incredible problems. Like, I need to send an email to 9,000 people with slightly different subject lines. Help. I'm thinking, what in the heck? But someone will write an automation for it. They'll write an automation using Power Automate. They'll write a flow, and they will send this email from Outlook to 9,000 people using like some sort of a data source with a slightly different subject line for each one. And I'm thinking, I would never have thought of this. I would never have thought of this. So citizen devs really do help other citizen devs solve problems because they use the low-code tools in the most optimal way possible. So I tell everyone, if you need something done with the least amount of drama to your life, call a citizen dev because they know how to do it. You know, a software engineer like me are like, okay, we need the code to Outlook. People are like, no, you don't need the code to Outlook. I'm like, let's go figure out where in Outlook we can add this feature. People are like, no, you don't need to add the feature to Outlook. You can just automate it. So I love the mindset of the citizen devs. It's just taken on a life of its own. And we love seeing them do just extraordinary things in the world.
Absolutely. I think that that's a perfect time for us to kind of go into, you were going to prepare a tech demonstration for us. So I think, would that be something that you can do now?
I can. So just some background. What I'm going to be showing you is a thing called Power App Studio. Power Apps are low-code app platform. It's our low-code app platform for Android and iOS phones. So how it works is you take a data source of some sort, like whether it's Excel or SharePoint or a low-code data source called Data First. Or you can use actually whatever data source you have. Lots of people use SQL, Salesforce, wherever your data happens to be stored. And then you can build a UI on top of it that generates like, a bunch of templates, or you can build your own with boxes and buttons, and it'll just be a standard app that runs within a sandbox on your phone that helps you, track inventory of fashion. It can help you figure out like oof days. It can do return to work stuff, all kinds of things. So what I'm going to be showing you is my favorite thing in the Power Platform called AI Builder. And AI Builder is a way for you to do basic classification of images or text so that you can kind of use this machine learning technology without actually having to become a data scientist. So, like we mentioned before, I do run a fashion company. And if you're watching this, you'll see that I'm surrounded by brightly colored fashion. So these are all things I've created. And one of the questions I get from my customers all the time is, Donna, I love the colors, but I hate florals. And I say, do you know what a floral is? Do I know what a floral is? How do we identify what is a floral and what is not a floral? So I will walk you through this thing that I made just to identify what is a floral and what is not a floral. So I recorded this. I've recorded this so I can talk over it. You start with the Power Platform or Power App Studio, which is make.powerapps.com. You can sign up for the free license thing to try it out. So there's a bunch of stuff in Power App Studio. You can build your app from scratch, etc. But right now I'm going to show you the AI tool set, since that's what this podcast is about. You build your business with AI. You've got a 30-day trial. There's a bunch of learning stuff there at the bottom. It says learn for every level. I recommend you go through those because it takes you step by step through some of these. So first thing we're going to do is use this thing called a pre-built model to build a business card reader. So business card reader, in the before times, we used to collect business cards. And if you were like me, you would lose them. So you get this business card reader here where you can just scan a business card, and then it will pull out the name of the person. And you can pull out whatever other information you like, phone number, email address, etc., etc. So you can see that I'm going to scan a business card there. And we're going to cross our fingers, and it's pulled out the name Vince because that's their name. Now, I've just written like one line of code here to say business card dot first name into that dialog box right there. So business card reader, pretty easy to use with the pre-built model. This is the one we're going to do the floral detection on. So for this one, I had to get a bunch of pictures of fabric, which was fun because I had got to go through my garage and take pictures of all of the fabric that I have there. Okay, so we're going to use...
Quick question about the business card reader. For the first name, is that a pre-built property that the Power AI platform provides?
Yes.
Or do you have to be able to code that yourself?
No. So it provides first name, last name, phone number, all of the things that would generally be on a business card, email address, home address, etc. So things that you would just go in and say, okay, what info do I want to pull out of this business card? And if that info is not available in the business card, it'll just leave the field blank. But as part of the pre-built model, it'll automatically, give you like 12 properties probably that you'd see in a business card.
Okay, awesome.
So here in this fabric model, I'm just choosing all of the fabric pictures that I'd like to use. So I've chosen all these pictures. I didn't do a very good job choosing them, so I'm going to choose all of them here. Yep. So I will select all of these to use to train my model. So the business card one was a pre-built model. This one, I'm going to actually train this model myself. And the whole point is to detect florals or not florals. So to do any sort of object detection, you need about 25 images where you classify whether it's a floral or not floral. So now you can see I've got my images, and this part is boring, but it's necessary. But do you see, this is where it's important to get different points of view. Like from a colorblind person's point of view, this would be a very different experience. From someone who lives in another country, a floral versus a not floral might be different. We in the US may consider a thing with leaves to be floral. Someone in another country may not. So I'm just drawing a box around all the flowers. I'm like, I think florals are flowers. So I'm just drawing a box around all the flowers I see and tagging it. Here we go, drawing boxes, drawing boxes. If you've seen those demos of like tacos or pizza or hamburgers or hot dogs or legs or, what is it? Those poodles or fried chicken. These are all...
Or like the blueberry muffins versus chihuahuas.
Yes, exactly. So if you've seen all of those are all data sets that people use to do classification. So this is all just called image classification. And as you can see, this is not very complex. Anyone can go through and do this. It's very time consuming. But I wanted to show you...
Is this part called like 2D bounding box?
Yeah. I think it can be called that. I just call it like, the box you draw around the thing. So it's, again, I'm not a data scientist. Because I'm a software engineer, I'm new to AI all up. I don't have a math background. I don't have a machine learning background. I had to learn all of this myself to just do my job. And now I use this kind of tech everywhere just to solve all kinds of problems. So we're coming up on the end of our floral tagging here. One more. So once we've tagged all of these, we're actually going to test them and say how accurate was our image classification. Now, the more you tag, the more accurate it's going to be. So we're going to run this now. It now takes a few minutes to do this. Now it's going to train this model here. It'll take a few minutes to train the model, so I'm just going to show you this one that I pre-trained. Exactly the same flowers. And it's saying, okay, let's test it. We're going to just put a sample image, something we did not tag before. So here's an image we did not tag. And it's going to identify how much percentage floral this image is. And there you go. That's not bad. Someone told me anything above 50% is considered good. I think that's pretty bad, but what do I know? So let's try something that's not a floral. This one definitely not, that I can tell.
Yeah, I don't see floral there.
And no objects marked. So that part worked. The identifying not a floral turned out to work better than identifying what is a floral. So that is my super, super simple demo. There's actually like complex real demos, but that one kind of gets across to people doing something text-based and doing something visual-based. So you can see what low-code AI can do.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. It was a fun demonstration. I'm curious, like, I know that you used, what was it, 25 images of floral? How much is it able to handle, like, if you were wanting to feed more images into it?
Oh, that can go on. Ideally, you tag, like, they say a statistically relevant data set is 1,000. So ideally, you feed in like 1,000 images, which you can do, and you actually should do. I just cannot feed in 1,000 images in a demo because all of you will be like, we get the point of.
Yeah, exactly. And general, this is a flower.
Yes, and this is the flower, and this is also a flower. But for the, it's also 1,000. It's at least 25 per image. Like if you're doing chihuahuas versus blueberries, you would do 25 chihuahuas and 25 blueberries, because then you have two tags that you'd want to assign each one. You're like, this is a chihuahua, this is a blueberry, this is a chihuahua, this is a blueberry. So you'd have to do 50 as a minimum. And if you want more fine-grained detail, then you'd want to do like 100,000, etc.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, obviously, the more images that you're able to feed, the more accurate the data is going to be. But for your demonstration, only having 25 images and having it work on both of them, I think that's pretty awesome.
It's pretty good. It's detailed. It's not super granular. Like if you put two different kinds of laptops and say, identify the Dell laptop, it's not going to be able to do it, right? That's going to need a lot more images. And this really brings us home to that conversation around data sets, right? You can see that creating a data set is very time consuming. It's time consuming. It takes like a lot of just like monotonous clicking and not getting bored and not getting distracted. So that's why people tend to just download data sources from wherever they can, right? From data sources. Bing's got a data source option that are open source that you can download and use. Kaggle, of course, is the common one that everyone likes to use. But getting reliable data sets is probably one of the biggest challenges in this space, according to just my experience.
Yeah. I think even just for the company, I know that like I work in marketing, so I'm not like in the granular areas that like my coworkers are in, but that's something that they talk about all the time as well, is just the quality of the data and the amount of data that's being fed. But yeah, I wanted to ask you really quick, what is like a story that you've heard of like a use case for someone using your Power Platform that you thought was just like, wow, that's a really fun way to use it?
So there are a lot, lots and lots of business use cases, and a lot of just useful things over the course of the past year. So just yesterday, I heard about a woman who worked at the Department of Health in Florida, Megan. And Megan comes from a biomedical background. She is an epidemiologist. So she's a study in all of the stuff we've been dealing with for the past year. But one of the issues they were having is they had no idea how to detect COVID in public schools across the board in Florida. Like each school had their own tracking system. And if schools are the way they used to be when I was there, it was done on like sheets of paper. So she said, this is ridiculous. Let's find a better way to do this. So she actually built a Power App that she rolled out to all of the school districts, to whoever was in charge of taking attendance in classrooms and identifying, okay, put your student names into the data store here. And they would show up in your Power App and you mark them as absent or absent due to COVID. And then they would do a good job in classifying like, okay, student, they have COVID or not in their house, or they actually have it themselves, etc. And when it's time for them to return to school, they needed to see like, you're cleared of COVID form. So parents were able to upload the form directly and it would show up in the app itself attached to the data store. So that was a very just useful case that I thought was absolutely fascinating. And again, she comes from completely non-tech background. She said, I have never built tech in my entire life, but I can't wait to do more with this. And they have so much information from this pandemic period on how infectious diseases spread. And she's very, very interested to see, like, okay, if 2 people in a classroom had COVID, did everyone get it? Just interesting stats and data. Right now, it's all anecdotal data that we talk about. We're like, oh, if 1 kid has it, every kid will get it. Is that true? I don't know. But she actually has the information to go ahead and track this stuff. So that was one interesting one. Another one that I tell a lot is I have a friend in Lagos, Nigeria, Foyen, and she works in the IT department. So she doesn't have a coding background, but she has a tech background. And she works at a large bank called Sterling Bank. So she works at headquarters. They have 197 bank branches all over Nigeria. So one of the things that they do at these bank branches when they're moving money from vault to ATM is they used to write it down in an Excel spreadsheet. So everyone would write their transactions. And at the end of the week, someone from each bank branch, 197 of them, would email those Excel spreadsheets to the central office. And some poor sap in the CFO's office job was to consolidate all those to say how much money moved from here to there. That is not a fun job, right? You can imagine this is a nightmare of, okay, someone forgot to send one. Oh, we forgot to copy something. Oh, we overrode something. A mess. So she said, this whole thing is ridiculous. We're not doing this. So she built a Power App that she deployed to the phones. Actually, she deployed to tablets in each of the bank branches. So this Power App ran on tablets. And as you're moving money, they would just fill out a form. They would say, my name is Donna. I'm moving $700 on this date. So all of this got automatically, when they hit submit, it got saved to SharePoint. The same SharePoint for all 197 branches. So you could pivot by the branch ID based on what I filled out. And at the end of the week, the person at the CFO's office had a much better time because they were just looking at a giant SharePoint with all of the transactions of the week. So it saved them like 60 hours a week, which is a lot.
Wow.
But it's just stuff like that, right? You don't think like, oh, bank branches have so much issue, but it's just basic things. I tell everyone, if you're looking for a way to use any sort of low-code tech, figure out a boring, terrible, unreliable paper process and try to digitize that. So don't make it like some mission critical thing. Just learn to use the tools by automating or trying to digitize a paper process.
Exactly. And I think anybody working in business is probably uber aware of something that they think should be more efficient than it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because you're talking about that, the person in the CFO's office, that sounds like a project management nightmare. But yeah, I wanted to ask
that
you.
That person did not really like their job. Friday afternoons, no one wants to be that person.
I would hate it. Yeah, I would also hate it. So I wanted to ask you, kind of with how helpful Power Platform's already been, what is your vision for the technology 10 years from now? Where do you think this is heading?
So my vision and our vision actually at Microsoft is that Power Platform is as used as Excel, and the usage models are similar, where I don't believe everyone in the world needs to create a Power App, but I believe many people will consume it. Like, for example, I don't create Excel sheets that often, but I consume them all the time for all kinds of things. It's the same as websites. I've maybe created 10 websites in my life, but I've consumed maybe 1 billion. So Power Apps and Power Platform will be as ubiquitous as that, because it's not creating technology that is new. It's using new technology to create something that people already use. So I want this to be a tool that anyone in the world can use to build something to solve their immediate problem. But I want people to be able to consume what other people have built without ever realizing, oh, a low-code tool built this thing, right? I want us to get out of that business because I personally don't care if this was a low-code tool or a high-code tool that was used to build this app or this website. It doesn't affect me as long as it solves my problem. So I want us to get to that point where there are 1 billion people on the planet who are using this product and they find it tremendously useful. in their life and work and such and such. And honestly, by saving themselves all that time and effort, like Foyan did, like Melissa did, in the Department of Health's office, they're able to now use their brain cycles to solve far bigger problems. So that's the ultimate goal. We want to empower everyone to do more. This is the do more part.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, so kind of segueing away from that, I wanted to ask you if you could kind of just explain a little bit about the other areas of interest that you have aside from Microsoft. I remember in our previous conversation, I was thinking about like is it the Dos Equis, like most interesting man or something like that? I was thinking you might be the most interesting human, like give him a run for his money.
So I have worked in tech for a long time, but like everyone else, I have gotten burned out many, many times. Staring at a screen all day, every day, trying to solve problems that will not be solved. It's very challenging. It's very hard because it's never ending. So I actually needed to pull myself away from the tech industry to do other things on nights and weekends. So while I've been working full time, I actually enrolled myself in community college here in Seattle and took up fiction writing, which was so random. Originally, it was going to be pottery because I'm like, oh, I'm going to make pots with my hands. In fact, no one registered for that, so pottery's canceled. And people are like, you should take fiction writing. It's next door. It's right there. It's fun. And I'm like, fiction writing? That sounds like homework. But I went and did it, and it's so fun. So fun. I took fiction writing for teens, and I learned so much. And humongous part of it is storytelling. And I give credit to being a fiction writer for my ability to speak to any audience about any topic for any amount of time, forever. People will be like, hey, Donna, can you talk to this audience about shoemaking? And I'm like, absolutely. Yes, I can do that. And it really is about storytelling, right? To be able to engage like a young adult audience for a very long amount of time or grab their attention quickly, that is a skill. And the way to do it is to learn fiction writing. So it's such a gift that just keeps on giving. I use it all the time, just constantly, to pull out like the most interesting parts of any message is the cool story that'll just grab someone right away. So fiction writing. Then 10 years later, I was also very burned out again, and I was determined to do something with my hands, like maybe not pottery, but something. I've always been very interested in fashion, always, but always as a fan. So a consumer of, an admirer of. And I thought finally, I'd watched way too much Project Runway at this point. And I thought, I think I can do this one day, very confidently. I'd never sewn in my life. I had no idea how to use a sewing machine. I just didn't know. But I am an engineer, and I'm overly confident about things I do not understand. So I enrolled myself in fashion school on the side, nights and weekends. And I walked right on in, like extreme confidence, like, hi, I'm in fashion school. What do I need? And they're like, a sewing machine, a serger, a this, that. And I'm writing this down, like, what is a serger? So I wrote down all this info, went to YouTube, taught myself to sew, hired someone to teach me details. And then I've been making my own clothes since, because I'm like, hey, I'm a software developer. I make software from nothing, so I can make clothes too. So that's what I've been doing. I've been making my own clothes for almost a decade at this point. And 2 years ago, I said, okay, I'm going to start my own fashion line because enough people ask me. I give lots of talks on stages, and I always wear something that I've created. And everybody will ask me, like, where did you get that? You have humongous pockets. And I said, right, because it has to fit the mic pack. The mic pack is like this big. And women's fashion is not set up for that. So I always make huge pockets in all my clothes. You can see it right here. To put the mic pack in this pocket, my phone in this pocket, my conference badge in that pocket. So I put everything in my pockets, and then I always use bright print, so it hides the microphone. People are like, did you really design fashion to speak in public? I said, yes, because I'm a dev. This is what we do. We see a problem, we solve the problem. See a problem, solve the problem. So this is my fashion line, Prima Dona Studios. It's for the woman in the spotlight. So many women are in the spotlight, and I don't believe there's a fashion line that specifically caters to us who believe in economic power for women by women. So that is my other thing that I do on the side. So much tech is involved, by the way, to run a full-time company on the side while working a full-time job.
Absolutely. It's pretty fantastic, to be honest. Like, I know that I'm somebody who is kind of a, I don't know, serial hobbyist, where like if I have a hobby, I want to learn it to its fullest extent. So like I'll pick up books and try to like, because I also have, I mean, in a different way, but like that kind of irrational belief in myself, like, oh, if I just put in the time, like I can do it. But you've really done it. So it's pretty cool to see. It's inspiring.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask one more question before we go. I want to be, respectful of your time, which is, what is one misconception that a lot of people have about AI that you'd like to set the record straight on?
One misconception that people have about AI. I think people believe that AI or machine learning or, any sort of advanced tech like this is only for a few, that it doesn't affect you. And not only is AI here, it's all around you. It also needs you to be a part of it. So what I mean by that is anytime, if you use Facebook or Twitter or whatever it is, if you upload a picture, it'll automatically do face detection. It'll identify like, oh, that's you, that's your mom, that's this person. That's AI at work right there. You've already contributed to this with your data set, which is uploading a lot of pictures. If you use an iPhone, I know it'll put people by categories in your photo library. You can see all of the pictures of a certain person. That's face recognition, right? That's already AI at work. So don't feel that this is something that is done by and for people in other industries or a bunch of nerds in Silicon Valley and Seattle. It affects you every single day, and it is all around you. So the more just informed you can get about it, the better and more confident you'll be. And just be cognizant of what data you are putting out there into the world, because everything can be used as part of a data set. So I am very, very particular about which data I put out into the world. I understand that I'm trading convenience for privacy, but at least do it deliberately, because then you're like, you know what, this is violating some privacy or taking some privacy away from me, but the convenience factor is worth it. So keep in mind, everything is part of a data set out there somewhere. And one of the best things we can do is get a little bit involved so we understand how it's being used.
Absolutely. That's perfect. Yeah, I wanted to ask you if you could inform people, our listeners, of where they can find you if they wanted to kind of learn more. How can they do that?
Of course. So I'm very, very findable on both Twitter and LinkedIn. Twitter, it's just Dona Sarkar, Dona with one N. And on LinkedIn, it's same, Dona Sarkar, Dona with one N. But I'm very, very active on both of these because this is where I end up connecting with people from all over the world. So bring me your stories. I can't wait to hear from you.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing with us. We really appreciate your time.
Of course. Thank you.
Okay. Take care.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. This was fun. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye. That concludes today's episode. We want to thank you for listening all the way to the end. This episode was brought to you by MarsCrowd, your one-stop data labeling and collection service provider. For more info, feel free to click the website link in the description. We look forward to you tuning in for our next episode on how AI is changing society.